Hi, Tom Trento, Director of the United West. Well, a very interesting segment today, Monday, June 8th, 2020. We're going to go back 53 years ago to the day, June 8th, Thursday, in Israel. At the time, it was the middle of the Six-Day War, and with us, our dear friend, Dr. Roni Wexler, who was an IDF, Israeli Defense Forces soldier in the middle of that war as a young guy. We're going to look at that had international ramifications to this day. We're going to look at that through the eyes of Dr. Roni Wexler. Roni, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for asking. And I would like to take the opportunity to say shalom to all those who are watching us wherever they are, and those who've been with us to Israel. I'd like to see you there again.
Yeah, Ron, to the day, June 8th, 1967 was a Thursday. The war started on a Monday, it ended on a Sunday. You were a young soldier in the IDF. What was it like? Give us a feel for what the month of May was like in 1967 in Israel.
Well, in order to really give it a good answer in a very short period of time, I would like to say that in a way, the 6 Days War was chapter 2 of the independence war in Israel. And the reason for it is that at the end of the Independence Day, where 7 countries attacked Israel and Israel somehow survived, there was no peace agreement. And the border was basically the line of ceasefire. So Jerusalem, for instance, was divided to 2. The most important parts of Jerusalem to Christians and Jews weren't in the hands of Israel. And so are other parts, like in Galilee. Part that we see today is Galilee, the Golan Heights, and other areas in Judea and Samaria were not in Israel, because at the time of ceasefire, we stopped there, and that kind of designated the borders, the unofficial borders, the ceasefire borders. Now, in May of 1967, after many skirmishes on the borders and many attacks by Syrians on kibbutz settlements in Galilee and everywhere in Israel, murders and kidnappings and all kinds of things, all of a sudden during more or less the Passover in 1967, that was in May, Abdul Nasser, the president of Egypt, and Assad, the father of Assad now in Syria, combined forces and put their armed forces under one command of Gamal Abdul Nasser in Egypt. Now, why is it significant? And to understand that, you'll understand the war better. Israel is an island, not by sea, by enemies, and we don't have the freedom to come and go. So trade in Israel depends very much on seaport. The most important seaport in Israel at the time was the seaport in Eilat, because that supplied the energy, all the oil that came from Iran, by the way, because at that time Israel and Iran were allied before the Khomeini came over and toppled down everything. Abdul Nasser decided to blockade the Red Sea, which is part of the Indian Ocean, and not allow any movement of trade into the most important part, as I said, of Israel, Eilat, where the oil came in. On the other side, and that's the south of Israel, on the north of Israel, where the country is Syria, they actually controlled on the Golan Heights the sources of the Jordan River. Now, what is the Jordan River to Israel? It's the only source of water. At that time, nobody talked about desalinization, and moving the sources of the Jordan River away from the main reservoir of water known as the Sea of Galilee meant suffocate Israel, or make Israel die with no supply of any fresh water. So in one hand, no supply is coming from the Red Sea, no oil, no energy. On the other hand, there would be no water. Now, how does the country survive? The way to do it, Abdul Nasser decided to move its forces, its armed forces, from Egypt to the northern part of Egypt called the Sinai Desert. Until that point, in the Sinai Desert, there was an understanding that the United Nations will separate between Israel and Egypt. Simply, Abdul Nasser, the president of Egypt, said to them, you have 24 hours to leave. And once they left, the Egyptian army came in. In the north, bulldozers started to move the sources of the Jordan River away from Israel. Well, Israel found itself in a situation where it was obvious it has to defend itself. So about a month before the war, about 30 days before the war, a complete mobilization of Israel started. What is mobilization in Israel? The Israeli army is not the kids like me at 20 years old that were there. Of course, we are the armed forces, but the real armed forces are the reservists. We served in the army for 3 years, but we continue to serve a month a year for the next 25 years. So the majority of people that can fight are actually people that are no longer serving on regular duty, but they're being called for reserve. And in case of war, everybody is being mobilized at the same time. What does it mean to a country like Israel? Teachers, bankers, lawyers, bakers, salesmen in the markets. Every man from 22 years to 45 is being taken away from anything they done and were brought back to the armed forces to become ready to a war. We watched on television and read in the newspaper and saw pictures of major armies passing the Suez Canal into Sinai and in the Golan Heights. Massive armies are being amassed against Israel, and every Israeli who is in an age that can fight is no longer working. So who's working? Kids are being brought to work in place of people that have been taken away, now serving again in the army, and people who are now in pension that are 78 years old, that were once bus drivers, are being brought back to drive buses because there's no men left to do their driving and to provide civilian population with any transportation systems. So Israel is choking. You can do it for 1 week, you can do it for 2 weeks, you can do it for 3 weeks, but how long can you be without people working? So the pressure was mounting. Now, seeing in Israel that had only 2.5 million population, and we're facing now something like 300 million people who are coming to attack us, the obvious was very obvious. So I remember it as if it was today, that beautiful parks in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, and I can talk about Tel Aviv because that's where I'm from, being designated as cemeteries. And rabbis are coming to prepare it so it could be used as sacred places for big cemeteries, because we figured that thousands and thousands were going to be killed. Now, when you live like this for a month and you're seeing your prime minister, at that time, Mr. Levi Eshkol, and you see the Secretary of State, at that time, Mr. Abba Eban, going from one city in Europe, one capital to another, trying to argue the case of Israel. How can you destroy Israel 19 years after World War II ended, or 20 years after World War II ended, and seeing all the atrocities in the death camp, now put Israel in a situation where it's going to be annihilated by Arabs? It didn't make any sense. Yet, in every government, in every capital in Europe, this man, Abba Eban, the Secretary of State, was dismissed. Nobody wanted to listen to him, including the United States of America. So we knew that we had to fight for our lives. So now, coming to the time of the war itself, we are now after 1 month of living in a way no one can even understand. Every man and every woman fit to war or to fight were in their units. Everybody back home was digging graves and supplying whatever supplies were needed because men weren't there to do the job. So the motivation to go to war for the survival, for our people, for our parents, for our children, for our families, for our country, for our land, was unquestionable. We were ready to go. Now, more specifically, the ingenuity of Israel. On May 4, now we are all in readiness, me, everybody. We're all ready to go to war. June 4, we get a very interesting order. You can go home and have a day of rest. How? Why? Well, in hindsight, to put the enemy's mind at ease, that there isn't going to be a war. We're all going home, you know. I think 1/3 of Israeli army with all the reservists on June 4 were with their parents, girlfriends, and friends going and having drinks and having fun in Tel Aviv. And the enemy obviously realized that there's nothing to worry about in that particular time. Now, when we go home as a soldier, we must be in tuned all the time to the radio. And there weren't too many radio channels. There was maybe 2 or 3. And we all had codes that were going to be given to us in the radio. Nonsense codes like black bird, like blue sea, like high sky, like deep ocean. But each code like this meant something for a group of people. And the moment we heard that code given to us, we knew that we had to leave the houses and to go to an assembly area and be brought to the places that we were meant to start the war. And here comes June 5 in 1967, and throughout the night before, those codes started to come out in droves. You know, it wasn't like listen to music and try to figure out if a code is being given. It was given one after the other. And I remember that early morning, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, I heard my code, and I took my kit bag and I took my machine gun, and I jumped out of the house, my mother kissing me and waving and everything. And what I remember until today, we lived in an apartment, and it was a row of apartments in the street. And from every building, there were soldiers, fully uniformed, with their kit bags and their weapons, all running together to different places where their transportation was to take them to where they needed to be. And we were taken to the places we were needed to be, and there were sirens. Civilians were told to go to shelters. We heard airplanes. We didn't know what to think, and we came to the places that we were needed to be. That's the feeling of the whole months before the war.
Wow, crazy situation for sure. When did you actually go into the service? At what point? What month? What year?
I went to service 2 years earlier. I was already about two and a half years in the army at that time, and at the time of the war, I was assigned to the Central Command, which is the central part. Israel is divided to the Northern Command, to the Central, and to the South. South dealt with Egypt basically and Sinai. The North with Lebanon and Syria, and the center was Jordan. As a matter of fact, Jordan was the army to contend with. It was the best trained army in the Middle East, obviously after Israel. They were very British inclined, and they were British trained. They were very well equipped, but there was almost like a gentleman agreement, unwritten agreement between King Hussein, the father of King Abdallah today, that Israel and Jordan would not have any grievances. We're certainly not going to fight each other. It was an understanding, unwritten, mind you. And the first day of the war, there was total radio silence. To come back at your question before, there was total radio silence. And I'm not talking about army radio silence. It was radio silence in Israel, period. You couldn't hear anything on the radio, just the radio announcement was there are skirmishes, there's a war in the Sinai. That's all you heard. You didn't hear anything about the Air Force or anything else. But we heard airplanes all the time. And the idea was that we wouldn't going to fight Jordan. And Jordan was holding on to Jerusalem and to Jericho and to the Dead Sea and to all those places. And I was in that part of Israel. So thinking about going to war or having to see action wasn't really there. And as I said, it was radio silence. King Hussein actually did not want to go to war. So in the first day of the war, when in hindsight, now we know that the air forces of Egypt and Iraq and then Jordan and Syria, not Jordan, Syria were decimated. There was there's no war between Israel and Jordan, and they kept it. Now, what happened, and again, later on, we found out that through telephone interception, a conversation between the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Assad in Syria, and King Hussein, they told him, those two told King Hussein, that the Tel Aviv is burning, which obviously wasn't because I could see Tel Aviv. And Israel is being totally destroyed. And if he is not moving in to help them cut Israel into two, because he was capable. Remember, in our tours to Israel, we know that the line, all the 67 borders were sometimes only 9 miles narrow. And he could, moving in with an armed forces into the belly of Israel, the Tel Aviv area, he could cut Israel to two. So they convinced him that he should do it, and Israel is losing, right, left, and center. Israel is losing in all the battles, and if he is not doing it, he's not going to be a part of the spoils. They won't give him anything. They would take away from what he already had. So he was convinced. And the second day of the war, he actually started to bombard Jerusalem, not only the front line, but places in the heart of Jerusalem, near the hotels that we're staying in. And our orders was then to move in, because now, and he moved a column, a tank column into Jerusalem, in the area where the King David Hotel is, where the security wall is now in. They actually moved into Jerusalem with tanks and armed forces. So then it was not game anymore. We understood that it means business, and this is where we started to fight against Jordan, and that actually brought to the point of destroying the defense lines of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, and push them all the way to the Jordan River. But you have to remember one thing: the Israeli army was a small army. Even though there were many reservists, we knew that we had to fight Egypt. That was a major army and major part of land. And we needed to also protect Galilee, but in a lesser way, because we didn't think that Syria was capable to do what they thought they would. And we didn't have enough equipment and manpower to fight in 3 different battles at the same time. So in the center, we had the lesser of what the other 2 parts had, and we actually had to move units from the other places to help up with what happened in the center once we realized that we have to fight also in the West Bank and in and around Jerusalem.
To recap, the war starts on Monday, June 5th, and the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, preemptively goes and destroys. Because of that, June 4th, everyone go home and it's calm. Put the enemy at ease, and the Israeli Air Force goes and destroys 2/3 of the Egyptian Air Force on the ground, and 2/3 of the Syrian Air Force. Just lost a couple of planes compared to hundreds of planes. In day one, the Israeli forces gained air superiority, which provided a blanket of protection for the ground troops. Day two, Nasser in Egypt tells the king in Jordan, like you said, Ron, everything's fine, we're killing them, The king attacks, which you're explaining, and now it's the battle for the old city, which on the 7th of June, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, June 7th, what happened? A miracle happened. Tell us about that miracle.
Well, a miracle is not describing the whole thing properly. I think everything in Israel. I should say that to live in Israel and not to believe in miracles is not being realistic, because everything is a miracle, and you have to believe in them. The Independence War was a miracle. And it didn't end because we didn't finish, because we had to stop. We took 1% of the population of Israel was killed in the Independence Day, in the Independence War. Now, 6 days war, we finished what we didn't finish in the Independence War. So now we have all Israel in our hand. And one thing that we as young Israelis always were yearning to is to come to the Temple Mount and to see where the temple was, and to walk into in the footsteps of the patriarchs, and to go to the graves of the fathers of the nations. But it was just a dream. We knew we knew, quote unquote, that it was never going to happen. And all of a sudden, it's in the central command where I was too. We're going to liberate Jerusalem. We're going to liberate all these holy places. And now we're in tune with everybody, because everybody knows what they need to do. It's no radio silence anymore. And at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 7th, not only we were on the army radio, but the entire country of Israel was now connected to Motagur, who was a general, later on became a general, who led the paratroopers into the Lion Gates in Jerusalem. And as you know from our trips to Israel, the moment you enter the Lion Gate, right to your left is the Temple Mount. And a few moments after they moved into the Lion Gate, on the radio, we heard him saying, "I'm driving through the Lion's Gate," just like that. And you hear shootings, and you hear screaming and yelling, and a lot of vibrations. And then maybe 20 minutes later, after it cleared up, and all this is on radio now, general radio, it says, Har Habayit Be'adenu. Temple Mount is in our hand. All Israel heard it at the same time. I don't know. It's like sitting the splitting of the sea and seeing or hearing, not seeing, a miracle that you never thought is even possible. Yet we didn't want to go into this war. And Jerusalem was liberated. I remember being in Jerusalem 3 days, third day of the war already, because we cleared up the areas near Ramallah and all these areas. And we were walking in the alleys that we walk on our tour. So everything was closed and everybody was fearful. But it was an amazing feeling. It's like, and you know, Israel fought against more than just three armies. I'll give you an example. First of all, the Iraqis sent their army to fight with Jordan against Israel. We stopped the Iraqi army on the way to help the Jordanians. Even Morocco, which is on the other side of Africa, sent a squadron of airplanes that was somehow diverted and landed up in an Israeli-kept area already. So we just took them. There were a lot of miracles. There's definitely a lot of miracles. I remember I was near Latrun where we go to visit each and every time, and that was a frightening. It was the most fearful place to be in the War of Independence, and not one shot was shot at us. You know, when we came to Latrun, they ran away. So there were many miracles. There were many miracles. It was unbelievable. But we suffered casualties. We fought 6 days, and there were over 800 Israeli soldiers dead. You know, we keep saying that maybe it wasn't as bad as the Yom Kippur War, because Yom Kippur War we suffered 2,600 dead, a little bit more, but it lasted almost 20 days. So if you divide the days, you know, it was just as bad. No war is a good war. But the people fought for the country. The people fought for the country. If I may, before you ask me the next question, I know that we developed a very good relationship with the Air Force in Israel. And the Air Force actually made that war miraculous. And you and I met with General Ivry later on that led the attack on the Iraqi nuclear center in Ozark. But in the 6 Days War, the men who made the miracle happen were General Mordecai or Moti Hod. And I didn't meet him. I wasn't in the Air Force. I didn't meet him. But later on, I met with his family. Much later on, I met with his family. He was already stricken by cancer, and he didn't look very good at all. But the family allowed to make a video, and he told his story that he called 8:45. 8:45 in the morning. And whatever we heard from General Ivry about his crazy genius attack on Ozark is nothing in comparison to what Moti Ho did with all the air forces in the area at 8:45. And why 8:45? 8:45 in the morning is the time when shifts are being changed. So people are either coming in or walking out, and nobody was 100% on the case. And for 20 days, every morning at 8:45, he sent the entire Israeli fighting force, airplanes, to a place far away in the Mediterranean, fully loaded, and they came back. And they knew what they are about to do if they weren't called back. On the 5th of May, when they came to that point that usually they have to come back, the order was go ahead. And they bypassed. And they came from Africa to destroy the Egyptian Air Force, not from Israel. And the same thing went all the way to Iraq and around Damascus. There are pictures. I think Life magazine actually had a special issue that showed the airport, international civilian airport in Cairo, where the Egyptian hid MiGs between Boeings. The Boeings were intact and the MiGs were burned. All this was designed by General Moti Hod, who I became very close friend with his family. But when I met with them, he was already stricken by cancer, and it didn't look good at all, and he didn't want to meet people.
Yeah, this is absolutely amazing. The precision of the Air Force attacks, way before smart bombs and GPS guidance. This was the skill of the pilot, and in terms of the bombing of these facilities. On that Wednesday, June 7th, the liberation of Jerusalem. What was your specific job? What were you trained to do as a soldier? And the next day, Thursday, June 8th, is 53 years ago today. Today. What did you do as a soldier, and where were you 53 years ago today, June 8th, 1967, one day after the liberation of Jerusalem?
Unfortunately, I was helping moving wounded people from our unit and other unit, and I spent most of the day, I think, in Hadassah Hospital, helping getting the wounded. I got back to my unit the next day, but the war was practically over. A lot of the equipment was moved north because we took the opportunity to attack the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights was one-day war, the last day of the war. Egypt was running away from Sinai. They crossed the Suez Canal, and in defying all odds, we ended up in the Suez Canal already on the fifth day. So it was a fast-moving war, very fast-moving war. But I think the big thing was seeing a lot of bad stuff, especially near and around the hospital, and I think it didn't down on us yet. I don't think so. I think the idea of Temple Mount in our hand and the temple and all this, yeah, it sunk in, but there was a lot of grief, a lot of, we didn't know very much. It was as we call it, Arafel Milchama. Arafel Milchama is the cloud of war. You don't know much. Information is not readily available. But there was a euphoric feeling, knowing that we somehow win. We didn't know how much we won. We didn't know yet. Golan Heights was yet just a dream. We didn't even think of it. Nobody in Israel thought that we were going to go up the Golan Heights. It was one-day war, and most of it was a decision of maybe one or two men, not the politicians even. It was the army.
Ron, the spoils of that war were the existing nation of Israel on June 4th was X, and then on June 11th, 6 days after the start on June 5th, it was twice as big. You had all the Sinai, you had all of the West Bank, all of the Golan, massive amounts of land won in that battle, preventing an attack by the Arab nations. Where were you specifically when you heard it's over? The war is over. The United Nations negotiated a ceasefire. Where were you at that moment, and what was your feeling?
I think I was with my unit. Um, Information started to get from different places. We heard of tens of thousands of Egyptian soldiers that were captured. We also heard about some Israeli. I think four. I don't quote me on it, but I think there was only four Israelis that were captured by Egypt in the 6 Days War, and we had thousands and thousands. Um, the war ended for me in I believe back where we started with all the units and I think getting getting the go ahead to actually celebrate, getting the hurrah, we won. There was good and bad about it, by the way. The way it happened, we became a little bit, I believe, uh, arrogant, which wasn't the best thing to do, but this is a story for another day.
All right, well, what
I
is
remember
the
going with some friends in the old city of Jerusalem into a barber shop and asked the barber to give me a shave. And two of my soldiers were behind me, and he was shaving me with a knife
an Arab? It was an Arab shaving you with a knife.
in the old city.
Probably not the smartest thing in the world to do, but um, what is the lesson that the world should learn from this situation, this 6 Day war?
Well, I would say that the first thing to learn is that God is in control, and that there are miracles. And on the more practical way for the world is that it's the land of Israel. It belongs to Israel. No matter what, it's going to always stay in Israel. And whoever comes against Israel is going to get it somehow. So I attribute a lot of it to miracle and God, but no matter what it is, we are going to stay in Israel. It's our land. We call it Eretz Israel, Am Israel Chai, and forever it will stay there. So anybody in the world, United Nations or individual countries that have ideas about it, let them think twice. That's my advice, because I think that Israel, to its ingenuity too, and it's all miracle. The fact that Israel has the armed forces that it has is also a miracle because it started from nothing. So Israel is not an army that you should take lightly, and it's a very motivated army. Though times change and some young people think differently, when it comes to have the guillotine drop on you, everybody is there, fully motivated, because we don't have another country. It's our country. And if we don't protect it, we're going to lose everything we have. And I'm talking as a Jew, Israeli.
All right, Dr. Roni Wexler, you were a young guy, 1967, fighting for your country. 6 years later, 1973, you had to do it all over again. And then you went on with your life and started a company, an educational company, to bring people from around the world to Israel to show them that miracle, that hand of God that you've been speaking about. And over these past 35 years, 40 years, you've taken 100,000 people and more and brought them to the land and let them see the land, the biblical elements of the land, the military aspect, the archaeological aspect, all the wonder of the Holy Land. We are the beneficiaries of that, the United West, as joining with you for many years now. It's changed all of our lives and all the lives you've impacted by bringing them to Israel and teaching them the truth, the biblical truth, the cultural truth, and the truth of the nation of Israel. So on this day, 53 years after you served, risking your life as many did, and 800 plus gave their life, we all thank you for that and look forward to many, many years ahead, bringing many more people to Israel and let them see and understand the miracle of Israel, what that means from a biblical, cultural, and a military perspective.
It will be a pleasure to go there again. As we all know, we're supposed to be there this year. The coronavirus made it impossible, But we're going there, God willing, next year, and I would like to see all our friends. Let's make it into a reunion. Of course, we would like to have some more new people to come to learn a little bit more about Israel. Many of them would be very interested, I'm sure. But I also would like to extend an invitation from the bottom of my heart to all those that have been with us to Israel and survived the corona now, to come back and let's celebrate. Let's celebrate a victory in Israel in the year 2021. About this time, that's where we usually go to Israel and celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, which is the day that the city of Jerusalem got reunified. The reunification of Israel, of Jerusalem, took place, obviously, during the 6 Days War, and this is why we are there on that particular uh, day of the year.
All right, thank you, Dr. Roni Wexler, and contact us at the United West if you'd like to come with us next May 2021 for having a guy who was there lead us and show us all that's taking place and all the wonder of that amazing land. Tom Trento signing off now for the United West, and stay in touch, people. We will we'll see you, if not sooner, we'll see you in May in Jerusalem. Next year in Jerusalem.